Hi, everybody. It's Elaine Lindsay here, Business Banter Plus. Thanks very much for joining us for the show. I want to introduce you to Julien Smith. Julien is a best-selling author, a professional voice actor. I'm going to go on for a few minutes here. Radio broadcaster. He's a consultant. He's a speaker. He's spoken actually at some of the largest corporations in the world, including Microsoft, American Express, Heineken International. His works appeared in Cosmopolitan, GQ, CNN, and a whole host of other places. I wasn't sure how you'd take me saying all that, but I think it's really important for people to know. I think you're incredibly well-rounded, and you really have a phenomenal resume for someone so young.
Thank you.
He's written a number of books. He's written Flinch, he's co-written Trust Agents, and now The Impact Equation with Chris Brogan. Welcome to the show, Julien.
Thank you, Elaine. I really appreciate the bio. I realize now that it sounds so long, and you know, as time goes on, you know, I've done all those things. It's true, and more. But I should really be shortening what that thing says, and I think it might be.
I didn't, and that's not all of it, which is really, really interesting, Julien. That's definitely not all of it. I have to say, I was lucky enough to get to see Julien in person when he was here in Ottawa last fall, and I asked him then. I told him about my Hangout show and said I wanted to have him on the show. And basically, I'm going to turn it over to Julien now because, as everybody knows, I just want to know, why are you passionate about what you're passionate about?
You know, that's a very big question, but I'll tell you the stuff that I'm interested in, and the stuff that I've been interested in a long time is sort of pushing. It's always pushing the boundaries of what currently exists and pushing the boundaries of what people feel they can do. So in my work, like we don't talk about it here on the show because it's not ready for launch, but I have a startup that I'm doing with 3 other guys and girls, one of whom is one of the early people at Twitter, and what we're doing is we're really attempting to make something that is essentially, that has our vision of the future in mind, that is a cool vision of the future, and that we want to make happen, and we feel it can happen. So that's, but more than that, like, my entire work is based really on attempting to do that. So sometimes that means creation of a sort of future version of myself that knows how to do X or Y thing, and I don't know how to do those things at all. So I have to fill in the gaps, and so that's what happened. For example, when we started writing books, Chris Brogan and I, in like 2007, 2008, before we even got our first deal, I think Chris viewed himself more as a writer than I did. And I I made myself into that person, and now I'm known for having like a voice or something. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that you have to make yourself into the person that you want to be, and that's what I'm interested in doing. I'm interested in the process of transformation, almost like this alchemy that happens, and how it happens, why it doesn't. If it doesn't happen to someone, then why is it not happening? And so I get a lot of emails asking me questions about stuff now because of my blog has a fair popularity, and I have the ability to hopefully answer these people and get an impression of what makes people tick a little bit. So it's a very big question about passion, but that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited about the process of transformation and the gap between the individual as they are, this sort of flawed, like normal person, and this idealized person, this sort of hero that they want to become, and the process in between that and how they make it happen.
It's so well put, and that is one of the words that I did take away, was transformation. Mm-hmm. That was it seems to be the core of your message, no matter what you're doing, and you yourself have morphed so many times. I think it's wonderful because it's possible for all of us, really, at no matter what age we're at. And I'm not going to quiz you on your new venture. I will just say to everybody that, yeah, keep watching Julien Smith. It's going to be amazing. On that note, let's dive into the impact equation, because I think it's got an awful lot of you in there.
Mhm.
An awful lot of the pieces, I think, that intrinsically make you this pioneer, if you will. That you seem to be 10 steps ahead already, and as you are bringing us along with you, you're still stepping out even farther, which I think is really fascinating.
I mean, yeah, it's the book as it was created was kind of an attempt to make a deliberate, almost like roadmap for how someone goes from having some kind of cool idea that they've never really pursued before with no advantage, right? Everybody knows that the process of creating something or the process of making something into a kind of phenomenon or whatever, you know, from kind of like building an audience for a show or to a blog to creating a new business to whatever it is, requires this a kind of experience that most people don't have. But actually, like, we have access, you know, this is a Marshall McLuhan quote, old Canadian, that's used to say, the medium is the message. And one of the things he said is, as soon as writing was invented, it made every future individual as smart as every individual in the past that has ever existed, because writing allows us to find out the wisdom and knowledge, all these things that we need to know, and just put them almost directly into the mind of the individual through writing. So that's what we try to do, because me and Chris had like years of making huge errors and mistakes about, you know, building audience, about creating projects and stuff like that, and so we've grown to believe that some people have that know how to do it better, and we distilled that into a kind of message that we think helps people a lot. So that's what the book became.
And there actually is an equation. The impact equation is an actual quantifiable unit, and that's what I found very, very useful. You say humans are, what is it, pattern recognition machines.
Mm-hmm.
Explain that for me.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, it's actually, I think it's hard. It might be hard at the beginning to get, but then once you see it, it becomes obvious, and you start to see it everywhere. That's a pattern by itself. So human beings are pattern recognition machines. What that means is that our job is to detect whether something is essentially danger or not on some level. So there's two kinds of errors that are, what they call false positive errors or false negative errors. False positive errors are not really much of a problem, but if you've ever recognized a face in the clouds, like look up into the clouds and you see a face, that's what's called a false positive. It means you see a pattern, you see something, but it's not actually there. That's like really common. People see all kinds of patterns all over the place, and actually the more patterns you see, the more likely you are to be something like schizophrenic. You get to this point where you start seeing patterns that don't exist, and it's why people become paranoid, for example.
Right.
They get to the point where they see all these conspiracies occurring around them. It's just an ability to recognize crazy amounts of patterns. Some of them don't exist. It also makes people high-level, very smart mathematicians, you know. Mm-hmm. So it does all of these things, but fundamentally a false positive is not a drastic error, because in the past what that meant was means you would see a bear in the woods or whatever in the distance, and you would go over and you'd be like, oh, there's no bear there. Okay, great. So it's called a false positive. Right. And then a false negative is the opposite of that, which is you look out into the wilderness and into the woods and you don't see a bear, except there is a bear, and you die. Yeah. So human beings survived when they saw false positives, when false positive errors occurred to them. So we became very, very good at recognizing patterns that weren't there over and over and over again. Those people had children, which were often, once again, very good at recognizing patterns, which allowed them to survive, and those that weren't good at recognizing patterns did not survive. Right. And so on into the generations up until now, where we see all kinds of patterns all the time, and most of them are no longer real because the world is changing. So, you know, like people's job is to recognize what's going on in their current environment to kind of make good decisions. But as the world changes, we become we're still good at recognizing patterns, but the patterns that we think we see are not the right thing. Like for example, we compare fads and trends. And fads and trends are totally different things. There's totally different from me wearing this cool shirt with polka dots that is cool right now, but that might not be cool in 6 months.
Yeah.
It's also a pattern shirt, which is so funny. So
that's what I was thinking.
It's a trend, right? It's a fashion, and it will go out of style. Whereas something that is rising in popularity sometimes just continues to rise in popularity, and we don't recognize the difference between the two. One of them goes up, will stay up, like Facebook. Another one goes down, like polka dotted shirts.
Yes.
So that's the kind of thing that I say we are recognizing patterns, and sometimes we're good at it and sometimes we're bad. And it's a really big aspect of our lives and how well we do in the world.
Now, how do we take that and funnel it into the best uses for business? Knowing that humans are pattern machines,
yeah.
How do you utilize that?
The answer is probably to number one, step out of your current environment. There's a great book I'm actually reading right now. It just came out by Chip and Dan Heath. I'll show it to you.
Oh, please.
It's called Decisive. It's backwards maybe on your screen, but
no, it's good.
Say that backwards. It says
Decisive.
It the right way.
Okay.
And it's all about the ability to make correct, to have correct judgment and make the right decision in certain processes. And actually, one of the things that it says is to step away from the emotion of the decision. So a great example of that, which they use in the book, is about Intel, which back in the day was making a bunch of memory, and they were making a lot of memory for computers. And but there were a bunch of Japanese companies that came up into the market and were doing better at making memory than Intel was. So they said, okay, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to? So they just invented this thing called a microprocessor. Okay, now obviously microprocessors are in every computer and are massive, and Intel is known for them, but at the time they weren't. And so they thought, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to get out of memory, which other people are doing better, and go move into this microprocessing thing? It's a huge decision.
Yeah.
But they need to decide whether or not they're seeing something that is just a bump in the road, or they're seeing a larger trend that something will happen. So the way that they did that, and one of the ways, there's many, but one of the ways to make a better decision is to step away and almost like to envision the situation as if it was in the past. So then go, okay, so here I am 5 years in the future. What happened here? Or another example of that, which they use in the book, is they literally sat in a room and they said, if we hired another CEO right here, right now, what would the CEO do?
Right.
Instead of us? So they put themselves out of their situation. They say, okay, the CEO will, and then immediately the other guy answers, he's like, the CEO would get us out of memory and into microprocessors. Yeah. So the guy goes, well, then why don't we just walk out of this room, walk back, and do that? You know, why don't we just do right now? If that's what someone new would do right in this instant, that is right for the company, with no emotional bias towards it, we should be doing the same thing. So it's a complex process to recognize it, but a lot of it has to do with the ability to step out of your usual own habits, because you have a pattern which might be a risk evasive one, the kind of thing where you go, anyway, I talk about that in the Flinch. Flinch is a book that I wrote.
Yes.
Which is,
yes.
If you're interested in reading it, then you can go to Amazon and you can download it for free onto Kindle, and talk about this risk-averse pattern that people had from hundreds of years ago, because errors used to result in death from bears, and now risks are almost insignificant and result in no death ever. So the reality is we're in a safer environment, and the result of being in a safer environment is we should be riskier, but we aren't. So that is a fundamental cognitive dissonance between sort of the everyday world and the way that we work in it, or whatever.
Yeah, it's almost I think people are lulled into this complacency. It's so much easier to not take the risk, just do what you're doing and maybe get ahead a little, rather than take a risk. And, you know, because we are still afraid of the bears, whether or not there are bears.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. You also talk about a beginner's guide to bravery. I really love the choice of that word bravery in terms of this impact equation, because that in itself is outside of what one would consider in terms of a business handbook. That bravery seems more on the level of chutzpah, masculinity.
It does. It does. You want to make sure that as you're making decisions, you're really, yeah, I mean, again, very big questions. However, what you're finding yourself in is you're finding yourself in a series of situations where it's always easier not to do much. I like to call this the upside and downside problem. The upside and downside problem is not really being able to look at, human beings are very bad at math, except for the good ones that work well with patterns. But most people are bad at math. This is why when you ask someone, are you saving for, should you save for retirement? They would, of course, say, yes, of course I should save for retirement. But then you ask them if they are saving for retirement, they'll always say, no, fuck no, of course not. I have no idea why you would do that.
Yeah.
I just ordered a double, I just ordered a giant extra large pizza with pepperoni and bacon on it. Like that's their usual decision-making process based around salt and fat,
Yeah.
So they don't make the decision that they know they should make intellectually, because there's a difference between their sort of rational brain and their emotional brain. So that's normal. Except we have to get good at the math, and the math usually allows us to judge the upside versus the downside. So it's a little bit like the bears. It's basically like looking at any risky situation or any situation in business and being able to say, okay, what is the worst case scenario? And then what is the best case scenario? And this is an old Stoic thing. So
Right.
Stoic philosophers in Greece used to say, God, who is it? Seneca used to have this thing where once a month he would put on like a bunch of like beggar robes and like, throw mud on himself and he would walk through the streets of Athens, and he would be like ridiculed and spat on and all these things. And he's like, he'd go back at the end of the day and he'd be like, is that as bad as it gets? I'd be like, yeah, this is the thing that I was afraid of, literally.
Yeah.
He's like, well, that wasn't that bad. So he's like, I got to keep doing what I'm going to do. So that's a good analysis, because it's an analysis of the downside.
Yes.
It's like being able to look at the downside in a rational way versus just the fear of, oh my God, someone's going to judge me. Go out and become judge, and then judge from hindsight, and then see from hindsight how you feel. So another way to look at that is the easy, quick thing of, should I go to the party? It doesn't matter what the party is. It doesn't even matter who's at the party, because you may not know who's at the party. This is fundamentally one of those things where if the downside of not going to the party is, so you don't go to the party, what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to stay here, and maybe I'll watch television, or I'll read a book, or I'll be on the internet for a couple of hours or something. So the upside of that is like quasi nothing, and then the downside of that is almost nothing either. So it's like super useless kind of line.
Minimal. Yeah.
But then the upside is I'm going to meet my future spouse. The upside is I'll meet a business partner. I'll have a super good time. The upside is I'll go and do all of these things that could happen. And then the downside of that same decision to go to the party is I'll be bored and do nothing, which is the same thing that'll happen in your house.
Yeah.
So you're looking at two different options, one of them that has a far higher upside. And yet we choose not to go to the party because it feels like it's risky, or it feels like it's going to be weird, or we don't feel like it, or whatever. So, I mean, that's essentially the process through which you start to make decisions. Again, I haven't read a lot of this book because it literally just came out yesterday. But it's probably,
yeah. I'm definitely going to get the book, because
I love how I'm selling another book.
Yeah. As you help sell another book, that's always good. That's always good.
The other one. Buy this book.
Yeah. I have to say, are you ever without a book, Julien?
I actually no. I read over 60 books a year, and I've been doing it for 5 years, pretty much straight. So I use a Kindle. Well, it's not a Kindle, it's actually an iPhone.
Yeah.
And the iPhone has probably 10 books at any given time, and which means that I shift between a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And then if I'm at an airport, like I was yesterday, flying from New York to San Francisco, where I am now, then I know I don't have a book to read in between the time when you go up and down on a plane. So in the meantime, I grab this and I read like 50 pages of it on the plane. So the reason that I do that is to make sure that I'm always like learning. Yes. And unfortunately, if you read so many business books, you end up becoming really frustrated with it because you don't learn anything from most of them, because many of this stuff is the same in a lot of them. But the good news of that is it means that when you write books, such as when I do, I can try and break that pattern and gather data from other sources. So when we started the book, The Impact Equation, we start talking about a survivalist who was mentored by Les Stroud. Les Stroud is a really famous survivalist on television who has that show Survivor Man. Survivor Man,
yes.
Exactly. And so this guy at the beginning of the book is mentored by Les Stroud, and his thing is he's referred to as the Riverman, and he would travel on rivers for like periods of months to be able to explore and make films about what the state of the river is on an environmental basis. Right. So this is the kind of story that you can look at and go, okay, I've never seen that in a business book, which is a good thing, of course.
Yeah, yeah. That was it was a very interesting introduction. When you start reading a book and you're expecting one thing and you get something totally different, it's really refreshing, and it's nice to be shaken up a little.
Yeah.
When you don't. Yeah, because it does allow. I'm a sponge for knowledge, and I really like to be able to use my head, and this, both Trust Agents and The Impact Equation, made me think. It made me, put certain things in perspective, and I have to say it made me get off my duff a little more often, and realize that, this is mine to make, and the only way to do that really is to do it. And that downside upside, I find myself doing that a lot, because if the bottom line, worst case scenario, is I'm not going to die, then hey, why not go for it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you definitely, the world has risk in it. It's not to think stupidly, like don't go throw yourself into a fire or something, but but you do have to conceive of you have to have a good analysis of what upside versus downside is, and it just helps you become the person that you want to be. It helps you become the person that can sort of look back. As I was reading on a Reddit thread earlier, saying, what is the best advice that someone who is older has given you, and it was like someone saying about his grandfather dying on his deathbed and talking about all these regrets that he had and saying you should not regret anything, go through those things. Well, you can actually imagine yourself in the position of this old person that is literally on their deathbed and be like, so what am I going to... And then make decisions as if you were this person. Yeah. It's easy to do. We're very good at it. It's probably one of the reasons we have such a large brain. And it helps make decisions. The other side of that is the kind of decision you make as a 16-year-old, right? Because you're 16 years old, and you'll look at your future that you don't really know much about or how the world works, and you'll be like, well, I'm going to become a lawyer because lawyers are like this. And then here you are at 35 or whatever age it is, and you become this lawyer, and you let a 16-year-old decide what you should do. And you're actually not the same person at all, and not the same, so it's a, I don't know, I use time in that way in order to be able to exercise sort of different methods of judgment or something.
Oh, that's interesting. I have to say that part of, I deal with a number of different people in different areas, HR and philanthropy and what have you. And Scott Sullivan, who's out of Las Vegas, he was talking to me about allowing yourself to improve. And I said, for the past 7 years, it's actually up on my website, my personal website. It says, every day I must improve 1%. I need to do 1% more every day, whatever that translates to. Does that speak to you, your philosophy? Does that make sense to you? Is that me using my head as far as upside is concerned?
Yeah, probably. I mean, everyone has to find their own way through the maze or whatever, but like, to me, those 1% differences, or those leaps or what have you, although they may become small, they, at the fundamental end of the day, like, you're going to walk up to this wall, whatever that wall is, and really, you're either going to go over that wall or not. Like, that's a 1 or 0 proposition.
Yeah.
This is 1, 0. And that's really about those 1%. It's you can't arrive at this wall and be like, well, fuck, I'm going all the way up here. You can't. It just cannot happen.
No.
So you really have to be making the decision way back about a wall you don't even know, or you don't know the size of, you don't know anything, and just be able to be like, I'm going to do 1% in faith that this wall, hopefully I'll be able to get over it. And that's, again, that's like the retirement thing. The retirement is fundamentally like, I'm going to need this much, assuming even retirement even exists, which it may not, because nobody's, paying up whatever. But that's, yeah, it's a 1 or 0 proposition at the end. Do I get over this hump? And that requires a series of previous decisions starting today. The best time to start was yesterday. The second best time was today.
Is now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and I think that sort of takes us up to, where to extract value. For both personal and business, take that forward.
You want to explain to me what the question is?
Yeah. Okay. You said, okay, some people worry that immediately is the wrong time to extract value. So when is the right time to extract value? How do you know? Is there a little formula for that, or is it based on everything else you have in front of you?
Again, these are very,
I'm asking huge questions, aren't I?
Yeah, but let me try and put my head around that. I think what I'm trying to say is that when the way that I view everything that I come to, every time that I'm making a kind of decision, or whenever I'm thinking about someone or whether or not to do something for them, I often just realize that what it comes down to is just a kind of, the world is weird because you wouldn't necessarily think about it this way. There's definitely this ability to think about resources sometimes. You're like, well, I've only got this much, and I gotta. But all of human beings and the way that we behave as a species is all based around reciprocity, and it always has. Like, back before iPhones and Twitter and everything, when we were in situations of scarce resources and not a lot of food, you would find yourself in a position where if you gave food to someone else or not was a very serious thing to do with crazy consequences. Either if you gave someone food later on, then they may survive, you may not, that kind of thing. So what this bred into us is it bred into us this sense of reciprocity, which incidentally is why earlier today, as I was walking through the streets of San Francisco, this kind of like Buddhist monk-looking dude is handing me this random thing. I'm actually on the phone, and he walks up to me and he just hands me this thing.
Oh.
And so this is the strategy that Hare Krishnas and other types of people, they're always handing something to you first, because that invokes a sense of reciprocity that is in the reptile brain.
Right.
And where you go, so sure, here's $1 or whatever. You don't know how to react.
Yes.
And your first instinct is not like, screw you, here's your thing back. It's actually to just return something. So that sense of reciprocity is always present. And it again, I think about it as a sense of upside or downside, or think about it as worst case scenario versus best case scenario, and say, like often you can do what is very little to you, which results in a great deal of benefit to others. It might be hard to do that, and you definitely, everything needs to be sort of thought out. But when it comes to making an introduction, when it comes to that kind of thing, I tend to say yes, or if I say no, it better be for a very serious reason, because the reality is I remember being that guy. I remember being that guy that had no advantage and that didn't really have anything to give, and then people were just good to me. So that's how I behave as well,
Well, I firmly believe that we get back what we give out. And if you're open and you're that, I suppose that reciprocity, I never thought of it as being so ingrained, but yeah, that's really, really interesting, because you automatically feel that you should give back for whatever, be it a compliment or be it lunch or be it whatever. You do feel that you have to give back. That's a different way of looking at it. Wow. I really have to rethink a few things now. But as you say, introductions, that's pretty easy, because like you, I've been very fortunate in that people have been very helpful, helping me along in my road over the years, and I do appreciate it, and I do remember that there was a time that I was probably in that person's shoes. So yeah, it's important to make sure you don't forget those things. And that's in the book you talk about the little bloggers. Same sort of scenario there is the newbies. They all have to come up through the ranks as well, and don't forget that you used to be one of them.
Yeah, it is true. And there's actually a New York Times article about this that came out, I think, today. And how would I find it?
New York Times article?
I'm going to find it on my Facebook wall if you just give me a second. I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to put it into the comments of the thing so that you can take a look at it. Hold on.
Oh, great. Great. See, that's one of the things I love about you. You're very much into the interactive and taking things wherever they go.
yeah. It may be a positive or a negative quality of the way that I do live presentations as well, but but the good side of it is that there is always, it means that I'm engaged. I'm doing something I care about, and I hope that means that people care versus seeing some kind of I don't know, rehearsed thing or whatever. So I put the stuff into the side over here, or over here, or whatever it is.
On the right, yeah.
Yeah.
Here, I will grab that. I'll copy the link, and I'm actually going to put it on the wall for the show, so other people can have it later as well. That's awesome. Thank you very much. That's really great. Okay, that brings us, we're just about getting out of time. The one thing that was, I think, very important to me, because I believe that people do business with people they know, like, and trust. And even though you started with this impact equation, the impact and what have you, there's a huge piece where you talk about the trust equation, because trust is a huge part of dealing with other human beings.
You could say it's everything. Yeah, it absolutely is. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and how does that, how do you work within the structures that are, if you will, and it must be very hard for people to have to deal with government and have to deal with corporate structures and what have you, and be, a lot of people are very untrusting now because there has been such a lack of trust with, Enron and other things. So how do you address that when you're talking to people, especially like millennials and younger people? how do you get it through to them that, you know, even though you've seen all this from the older generations being so lacking in trust, how do you know, mold trust into your lives?
Well, like, you live in Ottawa as well, so that makes it even more
Yes.
intense because you're surrounded by bureaucrats or
Oh,
whatever. So a lot of it really does have to do with the people that you generally surround yourself with. Trust, so if bringing it back to the trust equation was not created by us for that book. It has existed for at least 10 years and was created by three Harvard business guys. Their names are, actually, I saw one of them a couple of days ago, Charlie Green, David Maister, and Robert Galford. And the importance of something like the trust equation, like ours, the impact equation, the trust equation is almost, it's like cooler, like by probably 10 times, is that it takes something really up in the clouds and really nebulous, and then divides it into a series of things that are easy to remember and that you can know to get good at. So if someone were to say something like, you know, you need to be more trustworthy, where you're like, what the fuck? Like, I don't know how to deal with that. What does that even mean, more trustworthy? Please tell me what that is. I don't know how to solve that problem. If you say, so trust is made up of four things: credibility, intimacy, reliability, and self-interest. Then those four things can be measured. And those four things you can say, I'm a 1 on 10, I'm a 2 on 10, I'm a 3 on 10, etc. As a matter of fact, there's a test. It's called the Trusted Advisor Test. And there's a ton of data on it. I just saw the data recently. And I think something like 50,000 people have taken the test. And you can take it too online for free. If you want to Google it's called Trusted Advisor Test, it will give you a version of it. But those four things are the most important, or among the most important things for trust. Here's how they work. Credibility is, I trust him or her with regards to this thing. I trust them with regards to law, if they're a lawyer, or if they're a best-selling writer, then I trust them about writing and publishing. If they're an entrepreneur, I trust them with regards to raising money or whatever. So that's credibility. And then the second one is called reliability. Reliability is, I trust them to do something. So if they say they will call back, then I trust that they will call back. I trust them to show up on time. All of these things are, especially on the internet, they're underappreciated. And they're one of those things like, bloggers or web designers can always wait one more day, it can always happen, and that's a nightmare. So that's it. And the third one is intimacy, and intimacy is, I trust them with something.
Yes.
And that means I feel good around them, whatever. And then the last one is a negative, and it's self-interest, which is how much will they gain from this situation. So used car salesmen will get a commission, so obviously they will guide you towards a certain process. Politicians want to get reelected, so you can't trust them to make the right decision, that kind of thing. And there's a whole bunch of tests, and it turns out that politicians are at the bottom and nurses are at the top. Nurses are the #1 most trusted profession, and it's largely because of intimacy and their ability to sort of relate to a patient. So trust is super important, and even now, it's one of those things that never gets done. The people that have the highest amount of trust, there was actually a Nobel Prize for economics, not really a Nobel Prize, but in 1953 that came out in regards to trust, and it was called the Coase theorem. And basically what it says is people gather together in order to be able to create lower transaction costs amongst individuals, which is why people gather in companies, so they can do things faster and easier.
Yeah.
That is fundamentally about trust. So then Stephen R. Covey, who's the son of the guy who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, wrote about that and called it the speed of trust, and essentially said, this is why people do deals with Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett deals happen instantaneously, because people say, well, it's Warren Buffett, it'll be fine. And so you want to be one of those people, high trust people, that know so that people know that they can do business with you or work with you personally and it just makes literally everything easier.
Yeah.
It's a shocking thing. So you can look up the equation, you can look up everything. Yeah, I regret that has to be the last question. I almost want to go on, but it's that's the kind of thing that is important at the end of the day, is that human element, and that human element is never done. Like, you're always working on it. It can never be finished. You can never be the best. Still goes on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I really appreciate the time you've given me, Julien. I always ask my guests to leave everybody with one little nugget they can implement in their own lives right away, be it personal or be it business.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, mine is really simple. I haven't thought about it, but I could tell you right away. It's develop a system around yourself to make better decisions. Don't trust your ability to make good decisions, because you can't. You will make decisions based on fear, salt, and fat. You just can't do it. So instead, and sugar, don't. Yeah. So instead, make decisions based around a system that will guide you in the right direction. So in this case, I happen to use my iPhone, and my system is inside of my iPhone. But you can actually do it anywhere. You can create anything, something you can look at on a wall, and that will guide you towards being able to make better decisions. So if you don't have such a system, develop one. Know that it's not perfect, but it's still better than having nothing. People that are addicts, like Alcoholics Anonymous, know this, and they trust their system. You need to develop a system that you have faith in. Well, so that's my final word.
Wow. Julien, that is awesome. I thank you so much for being here. I'm going to add all of Julien's tidbits to the comments wall for the event. Thank you so much. I want you to go enjoy your dinner, and hopefully I'll get to see you when you come back to Canada.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for having me.
This was wonderful. Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.